Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting the webinar shortly. We're just going to let a few more people join before we begin. So we'll look to start in a minute or so. So given this 1 minute past, we'll look to start the presentations today. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fraser Ricketson, and I'll be chairing today's webinar, which is monitoring your digital contracts well for social care providers. We are joined today by two speakers whom I'll introduce shortly. Before we begin today's session, I just want to remind attendees of a few housekeeping rules. So the webinar session is being recorded. This is so that those who cannot attend today's session or who want to look back at it can re-watch the session today. These will be shared with all attendees along with a copy of the presentation slides and contact details for the presenters. Please can we ensure that all attendees are muted and that their cameras are turned off. This is just so that the presenters can be clearly seen and heard when giving the presentations and answering in the questions and answer sections later. When we do come to the questions and answers function, please can you use the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask your question. This is so that we can make sure that it has been asked and that an answer can be provided. If you can't use the questions and answers function, I'll put my email into the chat so that you can email them privately. If you can move to the next slide, please. So on screen now is the agenda for today's event. We have two presentations today, one from Mar Procurement and then the other from Dudley Council. There was meant to be another presentation for today. However, the presenter is unable to join us today due to an illness. What we will do is we intend to work with them to produce a written piece on this, and that will be shared in due course. Before we begin, I thought it would be useful to provide some more context to who Digital Care Hub are. Perfect. Digital Care Hub is a partnership project run by the members of the Care Provider Alliance. They represent care providers of adults with physical, sensory, or learning disabilities, people with mental ill health, and older people. Importantly, Digital Care Hub is run by social care providers for social care providers. They work in partnership with providers, representative bodies, and statutory bodies to support the digital journey of adult social care providers in England, and are funded by the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England. I'm from Care England, one of the representative bodies in partnership with Digital Care Hub and within the CPA. Go to the next slide, please. So this event is part of the Digital Care Hub Masterclass series and is the second part of our two-part webinar series, with the first part taking part last week. A link to the recording of the first will be shared soon, as well as a recording from this session. I want to take the opportunity to thank the NHS Transformation Directorate's Digitising Social Care programme for funding the series. Could we go to the next slide? I would like to take the opportunity to welcome our first speaker, Jonathan Crossland from Mar Procurement. Mar Procurement are a procurement specialist focused on supporting clients in the social care sector. They are a value-based company relentlessly focused on integrity, fairness, and quality. In everything they do, they believe in doing things better, ensuring fairness for clients and suppliers, and always doing the right thing. Mar Procurement has worked with over 60 care groups to identify and deliver operational efficiencies and cost-saving initiatives. We have with us Jonathan Crossland, who has over 10 years of experience within procurement, and he will be sharing Mar Procurement's perspective on how to manage contract lifestyles within the IT and digital space successfully. Jonathan, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fraser. So yes, I'm from Mar Procurement. I've been around the block a few years. I've been in financial services. I've worked in defence. I'm now consulting in the care sector. And from my world, I've managed contracts in all sorts of different spaces. I started off life as an IT project manager, moved into IT procurement, and then general indirect spend, which could be anything from marketing through to, new systems and services across the board. So this is effectively what myself and collaborating with some of my colleagues within Mar and the experience of what we've learned, how to manage the whole life contract with respect to IT systems and looking at digital care records, and how we can share that learning with you. It looks like a really long title, but it's not actually that scary. And I think that's the important thing to put across. It whole life cycle, whole life contract management sounds like this big beast of a thing that we have to do. And when it comes down to it, it really isn't that much more scary than it sounds. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So what is contract lifecycle management? It is taking your contract from the day you start, almost from the day you've made the selection of the supplier, right the way through to the day you leave. And I think the important thing here is, and if you saw the session previously, my colleague Chris talked about what does good IT procurement look like? How do you move it through contract negotiation and implementation? It's important here that contract lifecycle management starts then. If you're starting it after implementation, then there'll be things that will be missed. And I will catch up, I'll kind of talk about that shortly. Now, the important question here is, how does IT contract management differ from any other contract management that you would do for any other, maybe strategic supplier, maybe just a regular supplier? How does it differ? Well, in short, it actually doesn't. There is very little difference between managing an IT supplier versus managing a travel supplier, managing a key critical infrastructure supplier. The general principles apply across the board. So when it comes to these sorts of suppliers, you've got to take across the level of impact to the business, particularly with implementation and making sure that you've got the service that you've bought into and how that moves into development. New IT systems have big impacts on policies, processes, and ultimately individuals' ability to work and provide quality care. Strong contract management comes from collaborative approach, ensuring that people from all over the business really are thinking about the services as a multifaceted entity, as it touches on all sorts of different parts of the organization. And there's lots of people that get involved, even people that you don't necessarily think you would want to involve in managing the contract. It's useful to get their perspective. So in this session, we're going to go through a couple of key areas to consider, whether you manage an IT system, digital record management system, or a general contract. The tools and tricks are pretty much the same. So the important thing here is that you need to know what you want to monitor and what you want to manage. And so starting off at the contract negotiation stage is really important, because what you can put in there is your key performance indicators, your service level agreements. You can start telling the supplier, I want to monitor these because these things are important to me. As you start going through that, when it goes into implementation, you can keep referring back to these KPIs and SLAs to say, right, these are still important to me. We need to make sure that they go into the implementation, and how are our processes and our policies supporting the delivery of those KPIs? Because a supplier can put in some brilliant tools, but if the business is slowing it up, then it becomes a difficult challenge. So many, I've seen so many IT systems fail because they haven't actually accurately understood what those KPIs are, what those SLAs are, and what you want to be monitoring throughout. So the key thing is to bring people in from all over the business, whether that's technical subject matter experts, all the way down to finance. You need to make sure that finance are involved, that we're paying purchase orders, that we're getting those invoices sorted, and any service credits are being monitored, that sort of thing. So we need to make sure all of that's happening. Change management, as we move from implementation, we're developing the service, we're understanding how we're using it in the business, we're understanding how we're using it across the board, and also how we're adapting those tools. And I'll talk about a bit more of that a bit later on. I think the key thing about change management is significant change happens during implementation. It happens during the training phase. We've just switched on this, look how shiny our new IT system is. What then happens is that those incremental changes that we've made, could we tweak that? How do we amend that? It's making sure that as we go through this, it's all the documentation is updated for those little tweaks that we've made post-implementation. So that change management piece. And that all sits within that contract lifecycle piece. So we talk about managing the contract, but it's also looking at managing the service. And those two things sit hand in hand as you go through. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through and talk about exit and termination and what things we need to consider on that side of things. So during your life cycle, what do we need to look at? And that was a very slick slide change. It's like we know what we're doing. So there are many things we need to think about. These are the 4 things that came out in our learnings from our experience at MAR around how we can make sure that best things happen during the contract. I'm going to touch on 2, and if you'd like to have a conversation about how to manage cost, how to deal with cost management in contract lifecycle management, and how to deal with stakeholder management, my email address is all over the presentation. So if you want to drop me a line, I'd be more than happy to talk about it, or we can pick it up in the Q&A at the end. So in life management for the contract is the stage implementation almost through to exit management. You're not quite ready to terminate and you're not quite ready to start. You've just started, sorry. So that in-life piece is the service is up and running. We're ready to go. How are we going to look after it? It takes a lot of different skills to manage a contract. It's going to be project management. There's supplier management. There's stakeholder management. There's financial acumen. There's you've got to have some level of subject matter expertise. And whilst it feels like in-life contract management is just an email to the supplier saying, you know what, I need some help, you know, this doesn't work, or this is going wrong, I need you to fix it, or you haven't met your SLA this month. It is a lot more than that. It is also mixing these skills up and taking on those conversations in a more dynamic fashion, and it's a more collaborative approach. You're both getting something out of the relationship. You know, ultimately the supplier's getting your money, we understand that, and they are providing you a service which is benefiting your business. So to be able to do this collaboratively and manage it as we go through is really important. So all those different skills, they tend to fall on procurement people. So I've been kind of caught out with it before, thinking that, you know, I can do the project management, I can do the supply management. I'm a stakeholder person. I know what I'm talking about with the project. But actually what you need to do is bring people in from all other parts of the business. You know, I might be an IT procurement person, but I'm not an IT subject matter expert. Bring your subject matter expert into the conversations with your supplier as you're managing the contract. I'm particularly numerate. I'm very good at doing maths, but actually when it comes to invoices and, you know, managing rebates and managing service level credits, bring someone in from finance. Contract management shouldn't end up sitting on one person's shoulders. It is a collaborative effort within the business, and then it is also bringing it out from the wider organization. So when it comes to managing the agreements, we need to factor in a lot of these different areas. And those on the screen you can see, we've got risk and change, we've got governance, cost management. The 2 that I'm going to focus on are probably the most challenging to monitor, but actually have the greatest impact on the contract. So risk being the ever-moving beast that it is, and you should always keep your eye on what's happening both internally, externally, and how you can monitor it. And I've got a particularly good tool that I like using, and there are a number of different other ones you can use for managing risk. And if we could move on to the next slide. This particular model you might have seen, it comes in all sorts of different things. Some people use PEST, which is an anagram somewhere. Some people use PESTLE. I like steepled because it makes you start thinking around areas that doesn't necessarily cover, that is necessarily covered in the PESTLE model. So there's loads of tools available. What we've got here, and I've called out 3. But when you're managing your contracts and managing risk, you need to be looking at a variety of different factors. So you've got social factors, you've got economic factors, you've got political factors. All of these things are changing in the background of your contract. Whilst you're having those conversations with your suppliers, and I'll talk about how regularly we'll be having those conversations in just a moment, you need to think about all of these areas that are happening and what's happening, particularly in IT, technology. What new technology practices are happening? The dreaded AI, you know, what's happening there? What impacts are happening? With the changes going on with OpenAI, if they switched off their API, will it break your tool? How does that work? Hacking and security issues. You also need to look at environment. is keeping your services running on a clunky server in a corner cabinet somewhere the most economically viable way to do it? Is it, is it good for the business? Is it good for the planet generally? If you put it in the cloud, therefore your CO2 emissions will be less. It's thinking about things like that. You've also got recycling and IT equipment, recycling on that side of things. Now, what I like about the steepled model is it has the D on the end, and that's demographic. And when it comes to IT, as you're implementing new tools, as you're managing new tools, you need to be looking at your workforce demographic and the users' demographic to look at what they might need from the tool and how you can use it. Do you have a literate IT, an IT literate workforce? Are they majority native English speakers? Are they neurodiverse? And how can you adapt the tool to make sure that you're meeting their needs? And how is your demographic changing over time during the life cycle of the contract? So it's worth bearing all of these things in mind. You look at your supply and then move on to those conversations as we have them with the supplier. So if we move on to the next slide, those conversations come through governance, and those governance, you're going to have tiered meetings with your supplier. Now, I think the key thing here is that contract management and good governance isn't about an email saying this has gone wrong or I need this support. It's a two-way dialogue to ensure that everybody's aware of what service is being delivered, what they're working to, what's working, and what isn't. Sometimes things don't work out. As I say, it's two-way, because supplier bashing is not good governance. If you're going to go in there and complain and beat them up, there is going to be very little two-way collaborative working. It's going to be disruptive, and actually the level of support you receive, despite service levels and that sort of thing, they're not going to be as proactive as working with you as you may wish. And these sessions don't need to be a drawn-out process either. They're a collaborative forum to support the contract, and there will be positive and negative feedback throughout both the parties. Maybe finance aren't great at paying invoices, that happens. Maybe the service desk aren't as responsive as they should be. So by bringing in these good governance principles that we've got here, you'll be able to address those issues as we move forward, make sure that we're praising positivity. You are absolutely smashing your KPIs, brilliant stuff. We are paying our invoices on time, or we're paying them early, brilliant. Let's talk about that. And we'll pick those up in the quarterly and annual reviews. But what you'll see on here, and those eagle-eyed ones on there, you'll spot the obvious one, is monthly operational meetings are not on the governance schedule. Now, those are separate meetings and should be set by those that are working on the project, that have a lot of close-knit work with that. And whilst those operational meetings do feed into contract management and those issues, they should be kept at almost an arm's length, because there will be transactional stuff that you're dealing with on that level. And then the quarterly reviews and the annual reviews become an escalation point to deal with the any recurring issues, any problems that you're having. And then you can almost build in that additional, okay, you're not hitting your SLAs, we need to put in more regular feedback sessions. We need to look at those operational reviews. Are they working? It is that step up from the operational, so make sure you're staying strategic. And then those regular meetings will have key stakeholders in there to discuss business and market updates. We'll refer back to our steepled review, so you can see what's happening there. And both parties should be talking about that. Talk about your business, where you're going, what's changing. Have you acquired some new homes? Have your patient numbers gone up? All of those things. And then the supplier will have that conversation with you about, we're seeing this in the market, have you thought about doing it this way? And it becomes a really good two-way conversation. You'll also have your issue management that will be pushed up from your operational reviews. You'll be looking at your KPIs and your SLAs that are detailed in the contract. And as you talk these through, you'll talk about how you can resolve those issues, how we can make sure we're hitting adoption, how we're making sure that we're pushing through those changes that we need to do to make that system a lot slicker. And particularly in the first year, getting those quarterly reviews in regularly will also stop those cascade issues that happen. Sometimes you'll have one issue that impacts another, and then 6 months down the line, everything's gone sideways, and you don't actually have an easy mechanism to get back into the habit of having those conversations. So starting them early, getting them early is really good. Moving on to annual reviews, those are top to top sessions. Get your exec sponsors in, because they're going to want to talk about the business, but they're also going to want to talk about different ways of working. You know, what innovations out there in the market? How can we start doing some really cool stuff? Sometimes they can be done off-site. I really like a good annual review that's undertaken at the supplier premises, and then having those conversations in a more formal manner. I think those are really good. Then moving on to doing something where you can be a bit more informal, perhaps doing a team building exercise with those right people that are in the room. That's really cool. Those are really good fun. 3 and 4 are relatively straightforward, making sure you're continuing to, as those systems are developing, making sure you're doing user acceptance testing when you do those patches, when those updates come out, when Microsoft inevitably switch off Windows XP, is everything going to go falling over sideways? And making sure that you've got all the documentation inside assigned to those changes. You just need to make sure you're documenting your meeting minutes. I know it's not fun, but if you have them, that means you've got something to, oh, what did we talk about last quarter? Because time goes quickly and we've forgotten what's happened already. And then making sure we've got those trackers and logs. Now, unfortunately, these trackers and logs can turn into the stick to flog the donkey sometimes. And I think that's something that we need to be aware of. But it also becomes evidence if we're starting to see SLAs slip. We can say we've raised this 3 or 4 times, and then we can make a contractual, almost like a legal decision to go, do we want to end this contract early? What are the options in the contract that we can do to remediate that? You know, are there damages? Are there, you know, other service level credits that we can claim on? You know, what is it we can do? And by having those details logged, rather than it's just an email in, you know, Frank's inbox somewhere, it's logged, it's centralized, everybody can see it, and it's all working together. Then we've got cost. Now, these should be something that we're talking about on a regular basis, particularly quarterly reviews. And when it comes to IT systems, a lot of it is done on user counts, a lot of it is done on tiered numbers of users. So if you creep over the 100 user mark, your per user cost might go down. And it's managing that. It's managing those employee turnover. So how many people have left your business recently? How many people are we still paying access for the tool that doesn't necessarily need it? Or who are those people that need access to the tool that don't have access because we haven't raised the right purchase order? You know, so how can we make sure that we're managing the costs as we go through? The best thing to do there is to bring in someone from IT who's got the user access management, and someone from finance who can validate the bills. That doesn't need to sit on one person's head to do those tally ups. You can work together collaboratively. Sometimes the IT provider will have a user access list. They'll say, oh, you know, the last time Jonathan logged in was in 2012. We probably don't need to give him a license anymore. So it's making sure that you're kind of keeping that going. And again, it's the whole lot of this is about collaboration. It's two-way. It's not you talking at, and it's not them talking at you. The idea is we're working together in a team style to bring the service forward. And that's ultimately what we're doing. And what we're ultimately trying to do, and if you kind of keep that core goal, is to provide quality care. And so if you keep that core goal at the heart of what your governance is supposed to do, everybody's pushing in the right direction. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you very much. So we've managed our contract throughout its life cycle. We've developed it, it's changed, the world's changed, we've all moved on. You know, do we talk about what happened 3 years ago? What's happened since then? Where are our staff? What's going on? So we've explored all of that. And we need to decide now whether we want to terminate the agreement because it's come to its end, the contract's due for expiry. Do we want a new IT system? Do we want to look at the market? Are we happy where we are? So this is what we need to start thinking about. And I think the important thing here is, how do we think about this differently to any other contract that we manage? You know, how do we think about IT contracts versus anything else that we're managing? Well, we need to think about it in light of the same kind of steps that I'm about to show. So if we go on to the next slide, these are the 6 things we probably need to think about as we go through deciding whether we need to change. Now you can see what's all of these, and I'm sure you can start asking yourself these questions. If you've got a contract coming up for renewal, the key things you need to think about is, does the tool still work for you? And I think, how many tools have we used that we've got a manual fudge that sort of makes the system work and it does it in an output that we want? We've all used tools like that. Does that mean that it's working for us? Probably not. And is that because your business has changed? Is that because now people are working more remotely, or you've moved to a more mobile first sort of system rather than everybody lugging around laptops? How has your service developed over time? And then also looking at, has the relationship been right? How have you worked with the supplier? How's the supplier worked with you? Are you choosing to change because of change's sake? Or are you choosing to change because the service is fundamentally wrong? And why I ask that is, you've done your 3 years with your IT provider, your service provider. Now, you've gone through and you've thought about, does it work? Well, actually, it does work. Does it work for your new business and where you are now versus 3 years ago? Well, actually, it does. Do you still need it? Well, I absolutely still need it. Okay. Are you ready to, if you were to change the tool, are you ready to change? Is your business ready to change? Have you thought about what other changes happening? So it's worth thinking about all of those sorts of things. But ultimately, why am I looking to update? Why am I looking to change something that isn't necessarily needed to change? If you're just looking at cost, and this is a procurement trick that happens on a fairly regular basis. You come to the end of the contract and you say, "Hi, I need to tender this," and you talk to the supplier in your conversations with them. You say, we've come up for our 3 years. I need to tender this out. What would be the offer if we didn't go to tender? And 9 out of 10 times, a significant discount would come through. Now, you have to make sure that's compliant with your internal policies and processes. I know, so from working in defence, if it was over 5 years, then we'd have to retender it anyway. And I know that the public sector has slightly different ways, but ultimately, if it's within, and if it's a compliant approach and you're only looking to change because of cost, have a think about just having that conversation. If the relationship's been right and the tool's been right, have that conversation with them and say, look, I don't want to do a tender because it's a bunch of work for me and my team. And you don't want to do a tender because it's a bunch of work for you and your team. What's the discount you can give us? And that is literally the sentences you need to use. And 9 out of 10 times you'll get 10, 20%. And I know that sounds like a cheats move, but actually it works really well. And I think the key thing there is we're looking at time and efficiency. You can go off to do the things that you need to do that are actually delivering quality care, and nobody needs to fill out lots of paperwork. And that's the important thing. Key thing though, make sure you re-sign your contract. Otherwise legal get very upset. So we've looked at all of those considerations. We are going to move. So let's use our hypothetical. We are going to move to a new supplier. The landscape shows the business is ready for change. The relationship might have been right, it might not have been. The tool doesn't quite work for us, so we need to go out and study the market. So what would you use to go and study the wider business landscape? What's going on? Oh, it's the steeple method again. We're using this quite a lot. So you can use that from what's changed from a social development perspective, what's changed from a technological development perspective, what's changed economically. With the advent of OpenAI, has it made the tools cheaper, easier to use, more engaging? Has your demographic changed? Are you looking at perhaps less native English speakers? Therefore, do you need to look at a tool that will be able to have live translation just to make life a little bit easier for everybody? So those are all key things we need to think about. So we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to start talking to our supplier about, what, I'm sorry, we are going to be looking at either running a new tender, or we are going to end the agreement because we've already run a tender and you weren't successful. So the key thing to having those conversations is having those conversations early. Now, there is a conception, whereas if you leave it to the last minute, it creates competitive tension. Everybody wants the business. We'll leave it to the quarter end because that's when they get their bonus. It doesn't work. The supplier knows how long it takes to implement a new tool and how long migration of their data will take. Last minute doesn't work. What does is upfront discussion internally. We're looking to move because X, Y, and Z, and whether that's this issue or whether it's the tool's not right for us because the business has changed, or you were unsuccessful in the tender and we've provided the feedback on that. And then you can migrate that externally. Suppliers will rarely penalize you, despite general kind of misconceptions. They will rarely penalize you from leaving. They'll continue to be bound by the same contractual SLAs and KPIs and the same agreement as before, right up until the contract drop dead date. That is the time that it becomes, it gets switched off. So engage with them early. Will make sure that you have an amicable departure. And these tools are cyclical. IT is a relatively small world. You'll probably find in a few years' time when you come to retender it again that they might have a new tool because they've taken on board your feedback and they've updated it. So making sure it's an amicable departure. You need to involve the right people. So it's all, how many times have we said someone's gone off and run a project and a tender and gone, ready for you to switch, we don't have to, or that's not compliant because it doesn't meet our infosec requirements, or that doesn't have the right API to click into some other parts of our system. So it will go a lot smoother. And again, if you engage the right people early, they'll be able to support you. Does legal have capacity to look at the new contract or the renewal? Does InfoSec have the ability to support reviewing their policies and procedures? Does IT have the space to implement? How many times does somebody stop things because they just don't have capacity? We're all busy. And I think that by engaging early and saying, what, this is probably going to land early February. Let's make sure we've got some time diarised. Everybody's appraised of what's going on and we're all ready to go. Make sure you know what you're looking for. So define your need. Are you changing for the sake of change, or are you doing it because the new system does X, Y, and Z? And then you can communicate that out. Because the key thing is, if you know what you need and you've shared that with the right people, they're all going to start pulling in the right direction. We are changing because the new tool will provide us this. It'll make this budget line saving, and it'll deliver quality care to our patients because it does X, Y, and Z. That's what we need to do. And we need to confirm that message. We need to all make sure that we're going to look at that. And when we bring on the new tool, which feeds into Chris's thing from the previous session, around making sure that that implementation just works. And again, having the conversation early will make that a lot easier. You can communicate it, everything's up front. Now, the big thing is, how many times have you started an initiative, you've got halfway down the road, you've done a bunch of work, you've gone to finance, like, I'm ready to sign the contract, and they've gone, sorry, you don't have the budget. And then you're like, okay, well, that was 6 months work I'm not going to do. That's really frustrating, and that's frustrating for everybody that's involved. So confirm your budget right up front. So you've done your good, decent procurement stuff, that's fine. There's a financial budget. There'll be a pounds and pence cost for the service. What about the people's time budget? Have you got the right people available at the right time? Have you got your subject matter experts that will be able to do it? Have you got the IT? Have you got the right people from IT who have the time? And I don't know, sometimes it's cross-charged. There'll be a cost, perhaps cross-charging it. Have you got the right people available to make sure it hooks into all your other IT systems succinctly? Because more often than not, these projects will stop or be on a long hiatus right until those can be switched on. And that means managing the end of the existing contract really difficult. You'll have to put in an extension. You have to keep going with that ongoing governance that we talked about, and making sure that that pressure stays on them to maintain the KPIs and SLAs. So making sure you start all of these things early, there's a theme here, that you're starting all these conversations early with the right people is really important. So hopefully there are some key takeaways from what I've said, and I think you'll probably pick up a lot of them. It is collaborative. You are talking, keep in touch with your supplier. Make sure that you are talking to them quarterly at bare minimum, because IT changes really quickly. Whether it's changing the legislative landscape, do we talk about GDPR? You've got all of that sort of thing. You've got the Data Protection Act. You've got all of the new data laws that are coming in at the moment. How is that going to impact your tool, particularly if you've got patient details on there? What are the rights of access? So keep in touch, keeping those conversations going, really important. Making sure that you're staying compliant with legislation, making sure they're staying compliant with your contract, and making sure everything stays up to date. Consider what you have now and what you may not need. We've all got multiple systems plugged in. Are you paying for a tool twice? So a great example of this is SurveyMonkey. You've got SurveyMonkey and you've got an Office 365 license. You're paying SurveyMonkey, whatever it is, a couple of pounds a month. It's not a lot. But you've got Microsoft Forms built into your Office 365 license that does exactly the same thing. So making sure that you're looking at your tech base and going, okay, if I switch this off, okay, I'll make a saving. Great. That's one less account that's at risk from being, hacked or data leakage or anything like that. So that's great. But also you can start consolidating those services with your suppliers and having that conversation to understand what you can and can't switch off in your tool from your contract, or what you can switch on that will take away cost from another contract. It's just balancing those out. So again, it's having that conversation and making sure what you have and what you don't need. Make sure you involve all of your business, and that is making sure you're getting feedback from the users, making sure that IT remain content with the service desk support that they're getting, if they get a third line support, making sure that those KPIs and SLAs are being hit across the business. And that's touching in with the service owner, that's touching in with finance, that's touching in with, if there is starting things to move, things are moving in the wrong direction, maybe have a chat with legal, say, right, okay, what's the protocol for this? And then at the end of the contract, start planning it early. We all know it's coming, and that's good contract management, is knowing when the end date is or when the termination ability is. So 3 months, do you have 3 months, 6 months notice that you have to give if you're going to end the contract? If it's evergreen, it really shouldn't be evergreen, is the short answer. And it's making sure that you're planning with that, with the supplier, make sure they've got their exit management team ready, make sure you've got your exit management clauses all sorted out in your contract, making sure that's all lined up, and also making sure you're ready for that change internally as well. So I know we've done a bit of a whistle-stop tour. There was a lot that was going on there, and I think I've talked for quite a long time. So that's the end of where I'm at. But if there's anything else you'd like to talk about, my email address is all over the place, and I'll stick it in the chat as well. So if you'd like to follow up with anything else. And other than that, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. That was incredibly insightful. And we have had a few questions pop in through the chat. However, I wonder if it might be worth if David starts his presentation now, and then he can have his 15-20 minutes of his presentation. And then what we can do is we can go through the questions which have been asked through your presentation as well as David's, and then go through all of the questions at once so that the attendees can have the perspective from both sides.
Super.
So, David, I'm not sure if you're able to come in from now.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
So like Fraser said, it's really important that you can get as much out of these presentation slides as possible. We want you to ask lots of questions. I know you've asked a few in the chat already, but I really want you to take this opportunity to listen to what we're saying, but also ask questions. So we've got real world experience of actually delivering things like digital social care records. So yeah, please ask questions and please use us. Next slide then, please. To just give you an idea of the background which I've come from. So worked in multiple industries, working in defence, aerospace, education, automotive, nuclear, transport, lots and lots of different industries. And more recently at local authority and NHS level. So very much deemed to be, a program manager, although my background originally started off in electronics engineering And that helps me with understanding, with working with suppliers that are, technical IT type suppliers. It really helps indeed. Next slide, please. So what I want to do now is go through some hints and tips that I've gathered on my journey in program management for the last 15 years. It's kind of not just for digital social care records, but it's kind of anything around sort of program and contract management. And the first bullet point that I've got there is the absolute critical one. It's the crux of everything that you will ever do, anything that you'll ever deliver, anything that you'll ever contract manage. And it's called the project management triangle. And it's effectively trying to look at the quality of the delivery, what you're trying to actually deliver, the outputs, which in this instance, digital social care record will be actually implementing the digital social care record and gathering the benefits. And like with anything in life, there's always a pull on cost, scope, and time. So if you actually put more money into something, you can often get it delivered quicker. If you actually want it to do more things, often it costs more money because you want it to actually, ultimately have a higher quality. If you haven't got the right resources, it can often take a lot longer to do and a lot longer to deliver. So you're always pulling on that cost, scope, and time to actually get the quality delivery. Building on what Jonathan said as well, it's always absolutely critical on anything that you ever do to actually get the budget agreed, up front. So the cost is at the top of the triangle. Because if you haven't got the money agreed to do something like a digital social care record, then you're not really going to be going anywhere. So it's really important to get that agreed up front. So next item I've got is putting together a governance mechanism. So this is making sure that you've got a decision-making forum that allow you to make decisions quickly and robustly. Without that, it's going to be difficult to actually make progress because you might need to actually get, agreement of money. You might need to get agreement of a set of requirements. You might need to get agreement of the schedule. How can you get agreement of that without the right accountability behind it? Next one we've got is having the highest quality and skill team. Having the right people on the team makes things so much easier. Often specialists help a lot. So if you are developing a piece of software, then having a software engineer, to actually do that really helps because that's what they do. That's what they've practiced, in their qualifications, etc. So having specialists on the team to be able to actually work on complex tasks helps you enormously on actually being able to deliver everything to cost, scope, and time. Onboarding the supplier. So my take on this is always to introduce them and see them as part of the team. I know they've got a contract, and all of those things, but I do feel that having them as part of your team is important so you can actually achieve the right outcome at the end of this. So I've always introduced the supplier to the team. They've worked with the team. They meet with the team, and they're seen as, whilst they're a separate entity, they are still part of what we're trying to do. So I see them as part of my team. Next one is about managing the contract with supplier, and I know Jonathan's talked about a lot about this. And having a contract manager in place to do this. And Jonathan said, this might not be, any one person. It definitely isn't just one person. It is several people that are doing this. So we need to make sure that that is managed effectively so that you actually get the best value for money out of what you're trying to achieve. Being very, very careful about change management. Because if you don't manage change carefully, you can end up spending more and more money, with the supplier. So you just need to be careful about what the contract entails, what's been agreed, how many years is it, and if there are any changes during the cycle, how much money is it going to cost? And agreeing things like that upfront actually helps along that journey. Having an appropriate key performance indicators. So something that is measuring success again, around this thing, always think back to that triangle, that project management triangle. Having KPIs around cost, scope, and time is the way to go for whenever you're thinking about a KPI. And having a service level agreement so that the supplier actually reacts to what you're asking in place. And in my next slide, I'll go through a real world example of a service level agreement that we have in place. So designing the system to meet your requirements, including appropriate process documentation. So whatever system you're ever developing in your life, it is important to understand what the underlying process is that you're working to, because the system is just there as an enabler to actually do the process. In this instance, digital social care record, the system is the enabler. So understanding what do you do today. So that's important to actually document that, actually write it down. So all the people, what jobs they do, how do they carry out that today, and is important as a starting point. And that's kind of a reference point to build upon. And then you look at the future state process. So this is the journey of where do you want to go and work in the future. So if it's a digital social care record, how are you going to change the way of working because of that? So you might have, clear roles and responsibilities, and who's going to do what within those roles and responsibilities. And you have some form of workflow diagram, which goes through swim lanes of staff, so different roles and responsibilities, and from start to finish of that process journey. So those actually form part of the requirements, having that future state process. And it is really important to put that in place so you know what it is that you want your system to do. Sometimes, with all the requirements that you write down and your future state of what your process is, sometimes you can't actually meet those requirements. So you put them in an order, and sometimes it's called Moscow. So you have something like where you've got the must-have items that you absolutely got to do. You put the items that you would like to have, so the sort of could items or the should items, and so on and so forth until you actually get to the ones which are really just nice to haves. So you actually prioritize the requirements based upon what are the must-haves, and then really going all the way down to the nice to haves. So you develop the system with your supplier, and again, that should be based upon the process that you've agreed. So that future state process should be how the system is developed. And again, I've put this in bold and said it 3 times because it is that important. Whatever you develop, you gather your requirements, you design your system, all of those things are good, and you put your system together in some sort of test scenario. But you need to test it with the users. And this is absolutely vital to test, and test again to make sure that that system is delivering on those requirements that you've laid out. And again, it needs to be signed off with the business stakeholders, so that everybody's bought into, what it is that you've tested and what you're doing. So then planning and scheduling of the work has got to be, you're doing this right from the word go. So you have a schedule, sometimes it's called a Gantt chart, where it goes from the start of the journey all the way to the end. So, as you're building your team, there'll be, a line item on the Gantt chart, all the way to sort of go live and then business as usual. But you should have all of those items scheduled so you know what your journey is, and looking to when is it that you're looking to go live with the actual digital social care record implementation. Very, very important for those timelines to be realistic and to be bought in by everybody, all stakeholders. So supplier, the team, the governance board, all those people should be bought into that. So you're all working to the same time frame. Jonathan said quite a lot about stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management. This is, again, very important to make sure you're bringing people on the journey with you. So you're taking them from the start of the work all the way to the end, and then transition into business as usual. So communicate with stakeholders on regular intervals to say what you're doing, when you're doing it, and so on and so forth. Training the users so that the users actually understand how to use the system, and also the process as well is also helpful. And as you go live, bringing on aboard a team to make sure that they look after business as usual, so operations, if you like, and putting in a mechanism to measure the benefits as well. So you're looking to realize the benefits for why you were actually doing this in the first place. And again, I said this in the previous webinar that we did. You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be failures. Hopefully, a lot more successes than failures. But don't be afraid, but always be determined to succeed. And no matter what anything throws at you, and always be agile and on your feet, ready to change. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so what I'm going to go through now, this is a real world example. It's not really too dissimilar in many respects to the digital social care record, but it's a case study to show something that at Dudley Council, me as the sort of program manager have actually delivered recently with the providers of Dudley. So what the provider portal does is it's a back office based portal. So it's web-based so that you don't have to have the internal systems that we use. It's all accessed via the web. So all you need to do is have an internet access. And it connects directly back into our internal adult social care systems. So we use at Dudley Council, we use something called Liquid Logic, which is the social care system, which all the social care workers use. And we also have a complementary interlinked system called Controc, and that provides the finance capability, so to do all the things like payments and invoices. So those interjoin completely, and it's the system that I'm talking about here is around invoices, payments. It allows providers to actually enter their real costs that they've actually done rather than the estimated costs. So therefore, then the actual payment that they get is based upon those real costs, not the estimated ones. Many areas, including home care enablement, residential nursing, supported living, and that has been completed. Several months ago, we actually went live with all of those areas. So in terms of the actions that took us on that journey, and again, it's going through what I said on the previous slide, and a lot of the things that Jonathan actually brought up himself. So the first thing is to set up a governance board. We called it a project board, and that enables effective decision making. And the all-important person within that governance board is having a senior responsible officer to take overall accountability. So for this particular piece of work, we had at Dudley Council, we had all of the heads of service. So for each of the areas that are part of adult social care, we had information governance, look at things like data protection. We had IT on the governance board. We had business change on the board, and also myself. So the idea is that you have all the people that are on the board that are able to either provide resources to the project, the ones that are able to make decisions because they're going to be affected by the outcome of what you're trying to deliver. So you've got all of those people there that allow you to make decisions quickly and making decisions that are robust as well. To risk management, and again, as part of this governance board, which the project board, I actually meet up with them every month, we talk about risk management a lot. So we're always thinking about the future. What are the risks? What are we mitigating against for the future? We have mitigation plans all over the place for each risk and clear actions. We have owners assigned to these risks so that we've got absolute clarity on what we're doing with those risks if they do come about. We also look at issue management. So sometimes issues do come up and we deal with those as well with associated actions. We set up a delivery team with a designated lead. So within that, someone who's actually got knowledge about the business area that we're working in. So we worked with a senior manager in the commissioning team who works a lot with the providers within Dudley, a lady called Julie Cox. And within that, we had a team of people, which are other people in commissioning, people in central purchasing team, and we also had a specialist contract person who was able to actually deal with any problems that come up because he's in contract. And I said to you before about having the right people in your team, of all the people, having the specialist person at the heart and at the center of every day that goes by, it helps enormously to deal with problems and being able to get you over the line. That experience and capability, is so important. So onboarding the supplier to work with them as part of delivery team. So for much of our program that we've been doing and delivering, the supplier has been very much part of our, fortnightly team meeting. So turn up to team meeting and work with us, talk about problems that we're having and getting over those, overcoming them, any barriers to success, looking at them, to right, what we're going to do next to fix that. I also meet up myself personally. I meet up with the accounts manager to make sure that we're clear on what we're doing today. Any hurdles that we haven't got over. Looking at the key issues that we've got and risks as well for the future, and making sure we've got a roadmap for success. So we're planning for the next year ahead. So we're always looking ahead of ourselves to understand what is it we're doing today and what we're going to be doing tomorrow. Again, I see the team, the delivery team, and the supplier, we're all working together as one family, where you have ups and downs, just as you would do with your family, but they're there and you actually get over them together as one team. So the manager supplier contract with contracts manager. So I said earlier that I'd talk about this. So the contracts manager for this piece of work is myself, the lead PMO person, project management office person. She looks at the contract on a day-to-day basis. We have a person within procurements at Dudley Council who also looks after the contract. And we also have an assigned person in the IT department who looks at the contract. So I would say between all four of us, we're the contracts manager between all four, and we all know different parts of it and have strengths and weaknesses in those different parts. But together, we work as a team to actually get over any hurdles. So we deal with change management. So if we've got a change to do and it's been agreed at the project board, we would then go and speak with the supplier and we fill in the appropriate documentation to do the change request, get the budget and everything agreed at the board. So again, always having that accountability to go back to make a decision is always important to have that. And then effectively we ask for a quotation for that item, and then we get that agreed, and then we actually go and agree a schedule for that work to be delivered. We have KPIs and a service level agreement. So we have KPIs which are based around the project management triangle I talked about earlier. So we're always looking at the scope, cost, and time element. So we have a budget to work to. We have a timeline which we're delivering to within the schedule, and we have certain requirements that we've listed as the must-have requirements that must be delivered against. We have a service level agreement. So the supplier has a tool called Jira, which effectively is an issue management tool, and there is a service level agreement against that, which, depending on what level of severity of that issue that's been raised, they have to respond accordingly with a certain time frame. Some of those time frames are as little as 6 hours if it's critical. So if it's affecting operational live, so as we are now with the provider portal, if it broke it, there was a six hour SLA for them to actually get that up and running again. If it's a lesser issue, so e.g. you haven't gone live with a module, and you're still in test, then effectively then it would be deemed to be less severe. So the timelines for that might be 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on again on the severity. But having a service level agreement, as Jonathan said, is so important. All of these things are important, and to have all of them in place helps you to actually become, make a successful outcome. So next one, put together a schedule of delivery, and again, this has been agreed with Liquid Logic stroke contract. This has been agreed with the delivery team, so the commissioning, central purchasing, Gareth Price, the contract expert, and also all of the governance board, all the project boards agreed the timeline of working, so that nobody at any time can say that's supposed to be delivered this time. Well, that's not what was agreed. So you want to always get that agreed up front, and that's the timeline that you're working to. Sometimes there is something that comes up, and it could be a change of scope. It could be an unforeseen circumstance which actually changes that timeline. But I think the important thing in all of this is to manage the schedule, and so that everybody's clear and being communicated with on what that time. So I talked about requirements in the previous slide and having the future state process and the requirements actually agreed and developed with the users. So with the people that are actually going to be using the system, it needs to be developed with those users so that they can actually design what the process needs to look like in the future state and work to that, have clear requirements, get those signed off again with the actual project or governance board. Next one we've got is about implementing the system. So in the case of the provider portal, the main person implementing the system is Gareth. Again, Gareth's got 15 years of experience. He's implemented the provider portal, I think, at least 4 times previously. So he's done this, lots of times. He knows what the hurdles are, having worked at lots of other local authorities previously to develop the same sort of system. So again, having that specialism is so very, very important. Testing the system. So we have an area called user acceptance testing. So as well as live, the system being live, we actually have an area on our server called user acceptance testing. And we get all of the users that are going to be using the system to actually test it. And once it's all been tested, we get it signed off with the governance board just to make sure that everybody's clear on what it is that it can do. And sometimes during testing, you find issues that you can't get over. So it might be the fact that you've tested something and there's a certain requirement that you can't quite meet. The testing hasn't gone through comfortably. It could be that we have to raise an issue with the supplier to correct that. But then we have to take that back to the governance board saying, this is what it looks like currently. Are you happy with that? And for us to proceed to going towards live, yes or no. So put together training materials. So this is documentation. So we've got training guidelines documented. We've got e-learning. We've got classroom training that Gareth Price has developed to ensure that the users are really clear on how the system is, understand what the process is, and that effectively all of those users know what they're doing before it goes live. So then we communicate with all of the stakeholders that are going to be using the system. Anybody that's actually got any stake whatsoever in the system gets communicated on this before we do go live. We say what the go live date is, and then we actually head for that and go live on that date, which is exactly what we did. We didn't have any timeline anomalies for go live. Although we did have to overcome a cybersecurity testing issue within UAT. And again, I can't emphasize that enough. Cybersecurity testing to protect your data. Anything that is externally accessible should be cybersecurity tested, so penetration tested, so that we don't have any unforeseen hackers trying to hack into your system to actually get the data out of it. So we look at all of these things, working very closely with IT to make sure that we're doing everything possible to make the system as good quality as it can be. So then we went live. We went live on a staged approach. So we started off with a pilot working with 10 providers within Dudley. And then as we ironed out the bugs within user acceptance testing, we actually then moved on to the bigger rollout and started off with home care and reablement, then moved on to residential nursing, and then finally on to supported living, which is what we've done most recently. Then we moved, as we went live, we've actually then handed it over to the business as usual team. So for the first 3 months of going live, we have a triage system that was in place. So we deal with those issues directly with the supplier. So myself and Gareth Price primarily working with central purchasing team and also the commissioning teams. So we're directly working with them for the first 3 months, ironing out any potential bugs or anything that's not quite right. And then we've now, in fact, just a month ago, we actually moved over to full handover. So now IT have got the relationship with the supplier. They deal with staff that use the provider portal internally. They deal with all those requests, and then commissioning and central purchasing teams deal with any new suppliers, any new providers that come on board. So they're able to train them in the same way that Gareth Price did. And then finally, we are measuring the benefits of the system. So we are looking at the number of providers that have been onboarded, number of providers that have been trained, the number of people that are using the system with the way that it was intended. So how many invoices are we getting coming through? How many changes of the real costs are coming through? Rather than just having the estimates coming through, so we actually get those costs right for the end. But that is the end of the provider portal case study. But whether it's a provider portal or it's a digital social care record, it's a very, very similar process to actually develop it. And certainly the steps are the same that you need to go through. But I do encourage for anybody that's on this call to ask as many questions as you would like, so that you can actually make the most of the experience that the people have got on this call. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that incredibly important PowerPoint presentation that you gave. We have had a few questions, so what I'll do is I'll go through the ones right from the very beginning, and then if both you and Jonathan are able to give short answers to them both, or advise where to go if they need to get an answer elsewhere. So first question is, what strategies can be implemented to ensure proper monitoring of digital contracts in the social care industry?
I'll jump in with that one if you want. I think we touched on some of those. I think the key thing when you're monitoring the contracts is make sure you have SLAs in place and KPIs in place in your contract to start with. If you don't, do them as an addendum to the agreement. Make sure everybody's pulling in the same direction. That's the key strategy you're going to have to be able to monitor your contract as well as you can, is have tangible, you can call them smart, where they're smart targets and that sort of thing, where you can make sure that you have a way of recording them. They're not based on opinion, they are based on hard fact that you can monitor easily and regularly.
Is there anything you'd like to add, David, or do you want me to go to the next question?
Yeah, I think in terms of we have a contract management strategy whereby we monitor. We've actually got a spreadsheet of all of the original contract and the costing of it, because this piece of work, by the way, just to let everybody know, is millions of pounds that we've spent in Dudley with Liquid Logic and Contract. So it's a massive piece of work. And so we've got the baseline costs of what the cost to implement the sort of phase one. We're in phase two now, which is transformational. And then what we've done as we've gone into phase two is there's been change management happen. So we've understood and laid out every single cost of what the software costs to implement as a one-off cost. And then what we've got is annual maintenance costs as well. So we've built in all of those costs. So we're very clear on what the actual costing is to adult social care, across the whole contract. And when I first came into Dudley, even on the phase one, this wasn't being done very well at all, and we've made some changes to the contract within the phase one, and there was no clarity on what money had been spent, what had gone on anywhere. So it's important to lay it out and be organized, basically. Have spreadsheets and things to actually document this, so you've got absolute clarity on what it is that you're actually doing and where the money's going and what are your future costs as well, your annual maintenance costs.
Excellent. And I think that kind of leads quite nicely into the next question that we have, which is what are the potential risks and challenges associated with monitoring digital contracts in social care? And I'm not sure, maybe Jonathan, if you want to start on this and then David to follow.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge that I've seen is getting the right data in the right format to be able to monitor it. And whether that is from, using the right metrics, making sure that, the KPIs that you put in tend to be put in at contract stage rather than once the service is live. So it's how do you make sure you're pulling out that data in the right format so that you can continue to monitor it? And I think that mostly feeds into the implementation stage and keeping the contract at the heart of everything that you're doing. So as you go through, you're building the system, you're making sure you've got the metrics to be able to report and pull back on it. When it comes to risks, I don't know whether there is risks in monitoring contracts. The biggest risk is not doing it and not necessarily doing it effectively. But definitely challenges will be making sure you've got the right people, the right level of feedback, and the right level of people in the other organization as well. David, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so we actually have several KPIs that we monitor, with the supplier. So one of the most important ones is the actual timeline itself. So we've got an agreed timeline that we're working to, and so we've got those milestones agreed, and we are monitoring those. So again, in the accounts manager meeting that I do every month, but also the fortnightly team meeting. And again, these are at different levels. So you've got the team meeting, which is at the working level. You've got the accounts manager and more the management level. But all of these levels are important to monitor everything. But so the timeline's important. So if you got a go live date of August, 2023, then you deliver to the August 2023. And if they don't deliver to that date, what's the repercussion? That's one of the metrics that we have that's important. The other one that we do have that we look at is we have this Jira, issue management system that's used. And so we monitor that to make sure that they're actually delivering to their service level agreements, with the timelines. So I say if the provider portal went down, like say it went down now, and we raise that, Jira to say that there's a problem with the portal, that they've got 6 hours then to actually, fix that and get that from. So we monitor that, via a key performance indicator.
Actually, and touching on that, it's kind of understanding, when you're talking about hours and days, is it business days, is it business hours versus clock hours, and having that really explicit in your KPIs and SLAs is really important. So everybody's on the same page, because your 6 hour clock could start now and it won't be live until 11 o'clock tomorrow, versus actually we need it online and by 9 o'clock, please. So yeah, it's absolutely making sure you've got that understanding across the board.
Excellent. And there has been another question, and they've asked if there are any example contracts that could be shared with the attendee list, and that they know that there are a number of different, like every contract is tailored to the situation, but they would like to see like a draft version rather than just relying on the one contract that the supplier gave them. It might be a bit difficult to answer, so perhaps maybe we can kind of change that into, are there some like key points within a contract that someone should consider or look out for potentially, or if there's any advice that you can give on that side of things? Jonathan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I would put your governance schedule as a contractual requirement. So on a number of agreements that I use, one of the key schedules is this: we're going to meet on this forum. We're going to meet, 4 times a year doing our quarterly reviews. We're going to do one on our annual. These are the people that will be attending from both parties. And that way it becomes a contractual requirement, and everybody's got a, well, I don't fancy coming this week, right? No, it's in the contract. You have to come to this, you have to come to this, or your delegate will have to come to this. So I'd absolutely put that in there. We've talked a lot about SLAs and KPIs. I think also as you go through, it's making sure that you've got an understanding of what the service in there is, making that super explicit. And that sounds like general kind of contract stuff, but if it's fluffy, or it just says provider care portal, that's not really very helpful. So it's making sure you've got all of those key requirements, and that feeds into the implementation stage, but also making sure that if in your contract that it says we will provide X number of updates, your system will be supported for X number of years, because you don't want to switch something on and then 3 weeks later it's not supported anymore. So it's making sure that you're really clear about all of those things. When it comes to wanting example contracts, I would definitely seek legal advice. Have a chat with the legal team, because everything is different. Everything is bespoke to your organization, your policies, your risk benefits, your risk appetite, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so just building on what Jonathan said, so I would just reiterate, very much what you said, Jonathan. Actually, the schedule, KPIs, those sort of things are really important. Also, having clarity on what the costs are, for year one, and then if you've got a 3-year contract that you've agreed, what's the year 2 costs, year 3 costs?
Yeah.
So you've got clarity, on those costs up front. Also, from experience, coming into Dudley, when the project was kind of like 40%, done, Dudley got a little bit burnt, with contract management, because someone had agreed that, the phase 1 and the phase 2 costs and the timeline. So when I came in, it wasn't possible to achieve the phase 1 timeline. So therefore, the phase 2 timeline got eaten into as we went live with phase 1. So the repercussion of that was that there was costs due from Dudley Council to the supplier. And lessons learned from this are to, it's important to plan for the future, but don't overly commit to something that you can't actually achieve. So the repercussion of this was that, we had to actually renegotiate the contract with the supplier. And the one thing that we haven't touched too much on, although it has been touched on in stakeholder management, is have a good relationship with the supplier. I think that that's worth its weight in gold, because again, if they're seen as part of your team, when you have to do something like this, there's often a compromise between both parties. And I feel like the compromise between Liquid Logic and Dudley Council was perfect. And so I did that on behalf of Kevin, the CEO, and also Matt Barish, the director. And it was a good all round for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And the next 2 questions are very much reflective of the presentation you gave, Jonathan. And this is in relation to the steepled assessment method that you talked about earlier. And the 2 questions are, should we be considering the social value impact? And then would it be better to consider the governance aspects that have been listed when we are procuring a system?
Yeah, absolutely. So the S in steepled is social, and that pulls across all sorts of different kind of factors. It's change, it's what's going on, social value, and ESG, and all the associated acronyms for that is really important. And actually the steepled diagram covers a lot of those. So you're talking about the environment, you're talking about social development, you're talking about that sort of thing, but also social value. Are you using social enterprises? Are your supply chain using social enterprises? How can you kind of push that up? Strangely, I'm doing a bit of work around that at the moment, which talks around if your supplier might not be, a social enterprise, what are they doing within their supply chain? Are they pushing their social values down to their supply chain, so you can then work its way upwards? And it's about having that conversation and pulling it through in those quarterly or annual meetings to say, what, this is what our supply chain looks like. We're using minority-owned businesses. We're using local businesses rather than kind of importing stuff in from around the world. So it's having that open conversation with them, and you should definitely consider that as part of your governance process if that's what's important to your business. When it comes to the governance aspects, that's a great question. And when it comes to procuring your system, it goes back to that whole life management. The contract starts when you're negotiating it, but actually you should be feeding it in from way before that, which talks about defining your needs, which talks about getting the right people's input. And it goes back to starting early. So you're absolutely right there. You should be kind of feeding that in right from the very beginning. As part of your tender process, the expectation, you need to have a clause on there. The expectation will be you'll be attending these meetings. And if not, it should be in your contract that says, these are the meetings that we need, we need your senior people in for. So yeah, it's absolutely all part of that whole life cycle management.
Excellent, thank you. And a question for both of you now as well. It's been another question, which is how does this fit in with procurement law, and when you have a system that you want to keep but it's coming out of contract, so you have to go back out to tender?
This is really difficult. You have a supplier that you really like, you've got a great relationship with, but the regulations say you have to do it. And it all goes back to that fair transparency, and you've got to make sure that it's not you don't want to run a dodgy tender. It's the short answer. And I think that goes back to making sure that you've got your needs and requirements well detailed, well understood, and making sure that you've got that level playing field for all of those suppliers. And that will help you guide making that decision anyway. You might find that they are not necessarily the right supplier for you now that you've moved on, or it'll reinforce the fact that they really are the right provider for you. And I think that what you can do as part of that is sometimes you end up comparing your competitors to your incumbent, and sometimes that works to the incumbent's benefit, sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately, you've still got to run that tender, and you've got to be compliant. And it all goes back to making sure that you've got it documented, that it's reflecting your business's needs. And if it's reflecting your business's needs and the supplier is meeting those and it's doing it in the most effective way, then that tender process should show that for you.
Thank you. And David, I'm not too sure if you want to add any comments on that, or would you like to go to the next question?
Next question.
Excellent. So the following question is, how can social care providers leverage technology and automation to streamline the monitoring process for digital contracts?
I think David's got the tool for this, haven't you?
I mean, I think like with anything, it's important to actually work together with your so local authority must work together, with the providers to make sure that it works together. I mean, there's things that are happening across England, across the NHS England, things like the shared care record, which is working with the likes of doctors, nurses, the police to be able to share data records. And the local authorities are now involved in this as well. And going forwards, I suspect that where we'll go with this is we'll actually be sharing data from the digital social care records into the shared care records, so that everybody is got all the data shared. And it is important though to have the data and working together, and having a contract management facility which is agreed up front. So you have something like a provider portal, or you have something which actually enables you to be able to actually work together in a collaborative way, ultimately. But it's talking to each other. Jonathan, you said this so many times. It's about talking to each other and working together, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's communication.
Yeah, and it's using shared tools. If you've got a shared issue tracker, if you've got a shared Jira board, if you've got
Exactly.
any other tools you can leverage that you can all input into, it's going to make life easier. And it means one person doesn't have to then update everything. So using tools that are available,
Yes.
whether it's Microsoft Project or whatever, you can all feed in
Yeah.
that way.
There's something else actually that I've so before I came into Dudley, I'd actually been used cloud-based working. In fact, even back in the days, I was actually working at Kinetic, in fact, Jonathan. And then I had come to work at Dudley in 2019, and then it had completely gone dark. I mean, cloud was like, it's like almost like it was forgotten. Everything was done on servers and everything. And only just recently, in the last few months, have we actually started to work and use Office 365, as a cloud-based tool.
Yeah.
So we're now able to actually create, Excel documents that are shareable. So therefore, I could, put a series of actions, 24 different work stream actions on an Excel document and share that with the whole of adult social care. And you can give people view access, edit access. You can, depending on what role you are, and having tools like that, is invaluable. And I think the 365 cloud thing is really it's a brilliant thing. It's an absolutely amazing thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tag people in there. You can force it into their to-do lists. Yeah. It's really cool. We use it a lot here at MAR as well.
Yes.
Excellent. So I think we've got time for one more question. And I know there's more than one more question that has been asked. So what we'll do is we've recorded all the questions, and then in the FAQ sheet that we'll publish after this webinar, along with the recording, we'll make sure all of those questions are included as well, and an answer has been provided. But for the final question, what we'll do is should consideration be taken into using the NCSC vendor framework when procuring? I think that's the National Cybersecurity Centre framework. Jonathan, I'm not too sure on this, maybe.
Oh yeah, that's the acronym I was expecting it to be. Unless it's something different, in which case chuck it in the chat and we'll make sure we don't go off on a tangent. Yes, cybersecurity is important. And there are vendor frameworks available. You can access them via various different methods. It is important that you've got the right vendor in. Make sure they are cool, brilliant. So yeah, making sure that you've got a compliant vendor is really good, really important to use. If they're on the framework, great. There are other checks you can use. So whether it's cyber essentials, whether it's reviewing information security policies, a lot of them, a lot of the services that you'll be procuring may not be widely available. So the NCSC will be using, giving it out to a wide variety of service providers, whereas you might need something here. And I think that's the important thing, is to make sure that check what's on there, see what's available, and definitely try and leverage it if possible. It's one less contract you have to worry about, but also, there are other means to make sure that they're compliant. So you can utilize, information security codes of conduct. How do they align with what you're doing? You can have a chat with the Information Security Office, Information Commissioner's Office, ICO. Yeah. They will have a record of everybody, and if they've had any breaches, anything you need to worry about on that front. And then it's also making sure that if there's any other accreditations that they'll give, that will be able to support you. So whether it's ISO 27001, which is, I think, information management, and then there's information security and lots of other ISOs with lots of other numbers that I can never remember. So there are other methodologies, but if you've got access to the vendor framework and it's available and applicable, don't try and shoehorn in your service into what you think might work, because that goes back to good contract management, and therefore the ability to, you don't want to lose your ability to manage your contract because you've shoehorned it into a framework that may or may not be appropriate. So it's just having that consideration in there as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think before we look to close the session, I just want to remind, if you could go to the next slide, please, Katie. I just want to remind all of the attendees that are in the call that there is still funding available to help. So once we share the presentation slides with you, the link on the screen there is where you'll be able to find more information on the fund to be able to do this. And then we'll also share the contact details for myself, Digital Care Hub team, as well as the presenters as well. So if you need any support with this, please do get in contact with one of us, and we'll be more than happy to help. And we also have further resources which are available to help, and all of these are listed on the screen, as you can see. However, with the time of the session drawing to a close, I won't go through all of these, but please do have a look at these resources. They're incredibly helpful, and we're all here to support you on this digital journey. So as of now, it is 3:30, so I'll let everyone go. Thank you for attending today's session, and thank you to both David and Jonathan for the wonderful presentations that we received today. Incredibly insightful, and we'll follow up with all the attendees soon after this event to share the recording of this event and the event from last week, as well as the FAQ sheet. And I look forward to hearing from you all. Many thanks.